Evelyn Blake had always loved the quiet. It was the reason she left the busy city life behind after her father passed away, settling into the peaceful countryside. The rolling hills, the soft breeze that carried the scent of pine, and the symphony of bird songs were all she needed to feel at peace. But as winter approached, something about her father's farm felt off. The land had a stillness to it, not the peaceful kind, but a strange kind of hush that seemed to weigh down on her chest. The farmhouse, weathered and worn with time, had been left untouched for months. The horses, her father's beloved companions, seemed to sense it too. It was the horse named Blue that caught Evelyn's attention first. The mare had always been beautiful, a stunning blue-gray coat with soft eyes that seemed to understand everything about the world. But now, every morning, Blue stood in the shallow pond at the far end of the pasture, staring out at the frozen water as if waiting for something. At first, Evelyn thought it was simply a habit. The horses often went to the water in the early morning, cooling their hooves or grazing on the frosty grass. But Blue's behavior was different. She stood in the shallow part of the pond, her legs submerged in the freezing water, not moving. Evelyn watched from her window for several mornings, each time seeing the same thing, Blue, motionless in the icy cold. Maybe it's the cold, Evelyn thought. She's always been a bit of a loner. But the thought didn't settle well with her. Something didn't feel right. One morning, she decided to go out and check on the horses. The cold wind bit at her face as she made her way toward the pond. When she reached the water's edge, Evelyn saw it. Blue had broken through the thin layer of ice, standing on the cracked surface, her hooves splashing the water below. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't normal. The ice should have been too thick to break, and yet Blue had managed it without hesitation. Why would she do that? Evelyn wondered aloud, more to herself than anyone else. She knelt by the water, feeling the cold air bite at her cheeks, and watched the mare for a few more moments. Her instincts, trained by years of teaching biology and understanding ecosystems, told her something was wrong. This wasn't just a horse looking for a drink. This was a deeper need, a silent cry for something, and Evelyn had a feeling she needed to figure it out before it was too late. Later that morning, after finishing her chores, Evelyn made the decision to call the local vet, Dr. Marquez. He had been her father's vet for years, a calm, experienced man who knew how to handle even the most stubborn of animals. If anyone could figure out what was wrong with Blue, it was him. Within an hour, Dr. Marquez arrived, bundled up against the biting cold. Evelyn led him to the pond, where Blue was still standing in the shallow water. The vet immediately bent down to inspect the mare, carefully checking her legs, her hooves, and her coat. "She seems healthy," Dr. Marquez said after a moment, standing up and brushing his gloves off. "No obvious signs of illness. I think she's just being a horse." "But why the water?" Evelyn asked, her voice filled with doubt. "She's been doing this for days. Doesn't that seem strange?" Dr. Marquez scratched his chin, considering. Could be anxiety. Animals do strange things when they're stressed. Maybe she's just seeking comfort. Evelyn frowned, unconvinced. Comfort? In the middle of a frozen pond? The vet paused, looking back at the mare, who hadn't moved an inch. "It's a mystery, that's for sure. I'd recommend keeping an eye on her for a few days. If nothing changes, we might need to consider behavioral issues. It's rare, but it's possible." Evelyn nodded, but a sense of unease settled deeper in her chest. There had to be something more to it. The idea of an animal standing in ice-cold water for days didn't make sense. Not to her. As the vet prepared to leave, Evelyn stood by the pond, watching Blue. The other horses grazed in the distance, oblivious to the drama unfolding around them. "I'll figure this out, Blue," she whispered, more to the horse than herself. "I promise." The next few days were colder than usual, with the chill in the air slicing through Evelyn's thick wool sweater as she moved through the farm, Her mind kept returning to Blue, the mare, who seemed more lost in her own world than ever before. Evelyn watched from the kitchen window as the horse continued her strange ritual, standing still in the freezing pond day after day. Each time Evelyn saw Blue out there, a knot twisted tighter in her stomach. The mare's behavior wasn't simply a quirky habit or a seasonal change. There was something deeply unsettling about it. Evelyn had spent years teaching biology, yet no amount of theory or research could explain what she was witnessing. She understood ecosystems, the balance of life, and the ways animals reacted to their environment. But this? It felt like a puzzle missing key pieces. She couldn't just chalk it up to behavioral oddities, as Dr. Marquez had suggested. It didn't sit right with her, not with the way Blue stood motionless in the water, staring out as if waiting for something. The moment she finished her breakfast on that frigid morning, Evelyn grabbed her jacket and made her way back to the pond, determination written on her face. She had to do something that would give her the answers she desperately needed. She had already decided that she wasn't going to sit back and let her instincts be dismissed. This wasn't just about one horse. Something larger was at play here. Once again, she found Blue standing in the shallow end of the pond, her hooves submerged in the icy water. Evelyn's breath formed little clouds in the air as she approached, her boots crunching against the frost-covered grass. Blue didn't flinch, didn't even seem to notice her presence. Evelyn crouched down near the edge of the pond, eyeing the ice carefully. There was no sign of breaking ice, and yet there was Blue, standing unmoving as the wind howled around her. The contrast between the quiet of the mare and the harsh winds of winter struck Evelyn like a punch to the gut. This wasn't the behavior of an anxious horse. This was something deeper, something she couldn't yet comprehend. Evelyn stood up slowly, brushing off the wet grass that had gathered on her knees, and decided it was time to call Dr. Marquez again. If anyone could give her insight into this, it was him. An hour later, Dr. Marquez arrived, his blue pickup truck kicking up the dust as it pulled into the long gravel driveway. Evelyn met him at the door, her face tight with worry. She led him out to the pond again, not needing to explain the situation further. The vet was already familiar with Blue's strange behavior, and Evelyn could tell by the way he scanned the area that he was just as perplexed as she was. The vet knelt by the edge of the water, studying the mare closely. She hadn't moved. It was like she had become one with the frozen landscape, blending into the cold, still world that surrounded her. "I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Marquez admitted, his voice low and thoughtful. "There's nothing physically wrong with her. Her coat is fine. Her legs are fine. There's no visible sign of injury or infection." Evelyn paced back and forth, her boots leaving a trail in the frost-covered grass. "But she's been doing this for days now. I don't understand it. Something's wrong. It's not just stress. And not like you said before. It's almost like she's waiting for something." Dr. Marquez paused, looking up at Evelyn. "Maybe she's waiting for you to notice." Evelyn turned to him sharply. "What do you mean?" "The way animals behave, especially in strange circumstances, is often tied to a bigger picture," he explained, his voice more contemplative now. "Sometimes they're trying to tell us something we're not paying attention to. Blue could be trying to communicate something, but we're not seeing it yet." That thought struck Evelyn hard. She wasn't accustomed to feeling helpless in situations like this. She'd spent years teaching students to observe and understand nature. But now she was the one who couldn't piece together the puzzle. "We need to consider other possibilities," Dr. Marquez continued. "I think you're right to be concerned, but maybe it's not just Blue. Maybe something is happening around here that's affecting all the horses." Evelyn stopped pacing, looking at the vet. "You think it's a pattern?" "I do," Dr. Marquez said, standing up and brushing the cold dirt from his hands. "It's possible that other horses are exhibiting similar behavior. I've seen it in the past, especially when there's a change in the in environment. Maybe it's the water. Maybe it's something in the air. I don't know. But I think we need to look at the bigger picture here. The idea that this could be a part of a larger pattern was both a relief and a burden. It meant she wasn't imagining things, but it also suggested there was something much bigger going on than a lonely mare. Evelyn thanked Dr. Marquez, but before he left, he gave her a final piece of advice. Keep watching, Evelyn. You might start noticing things you missed before. Sometimes nature works in ways we can't immediately see. The answers will come. But you need to be patient. As Dr. Marquez's truck pulled away, Evelyn stood by the pond for a long time, watching Blue still, the cold water swirling gently around her hooves. She knew the path ahead would be difficult, but for the first time since her father's passing, Evelyn felt a spark of purpose ignite in her heart. She wasn't alone in this. She had the answers inside her. She just had to dig deep enough to find them. The following days were filled with an uneasy quiet, but Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. She had spent her career as a biology teacher, teaching her students to observe the smallest details in nature, to listen, to pay attention, to understand. And now, it felt like the land itself was trying to speak to her. She had to listen. Evelyn's mind was buzzing with Dr. Marquez's words. It's not just Blue. Maybe something is happening around here that's affecting all the horses. She wasn't sure exactly what that something might be, but she knew she had to find out. The idea that this wasn't an isolated incident gave her both a sense of urgency and a strange comfort. It wasn't just Blue going mad. There was a pattern. She wasn't imagining it. Something was going on, and she needed to uncover it. The first thing Evelyn did was reach out to the local community. Over the past week, she had noticed other horse owners in town as she went about her chores and errands. She'd heard snippets of conversation about horses acting strangely, but it hadn't really clicked until now. Maybe others had noticed similar things. The next morning, she drove into town to the feed store. It was a small, cluttered place with shelves stocked high with hay, grains, and various tack. The familiar scent of oats and dried herbs filled the air, and Evelyn welcomed the warmth as she stepped inside, rubbing the cold from her hands. As she was picking out some feed, she overheard a few horse owners chatting in the corner. "I don't know, Clara," one woman was saying, "but my horses have been acting weird lately. They keep hanging around the stream. They're just standing there in the water, like they're waiting for something." The other woman nodded in agreement. "Same thing happened to my gelding. I thought it was just a phase, but it's been going on for a week now. And it's not just the horses, my goats too. They're acting all strange, sticking near the stream, almost like they're drawn to it." Evelyn couldn't help but walk over. Her curiosity piqued. "Excuse me, I couldn't help but overhear. Are your horses, are they standing in the water?" The two women turned to her, eyeing her with interest. The first woman, Clara, spoke up. "Yeah, have you noticed that too? It's the oddest thing. They seem like they're drawn to the water. At first I thought it was just the cold, but they don't act like they're uncomfortable. They just stand there for hours." Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine. "That's exactly what's happening with my mare, Blue. She's been standing in the pond for days. I thought I was imagining things." Clara gave her a sympathetic look. "It's not just you. I've heard from other people too. My friend Rita down on the farm by the ridge said her horses are doing the same thing. It's like they're being called to the water." The conversation lingered for a moment, but Evelyn's mind was racing. She suddenly realized that this was more than just Blue's odd behavior. There was a widespread issue happening in the area, and the only thing they had in common was the water. Ponds, streams, rivers. It couldn't be a coincidence. "Oh, has anyone figured out what's going on?" Evelyn asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Clara shook her head. "No, we're all just guessing. Some think it's the minerals in the water, maybe something in the soil affecting them. Others think it's parasites or something they're picking up from the water." Parasites, the thought hung in the air, and Evelyn felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She knew the risk that came with parasites, especially in a livestock, but none of the horses seemed ill. None of them had shown any signs of sickness. "So, you think it could be something in the water?" Evelyn asked again, feeling the need to get to the bottom of this. I don't know," Claire admitted. "It's just a theory, but whatever it is, it's affecting all the animals. Even the birds have been acting strange, hovering around the water and drinking more than usual." Evelyn nodded, a plan forming in her mind. She needed to dig deeper. She couldn't just wait for something to happen. The behavior of the horses, and now the other animals, was too strange to ignore. After buying the feed, Evelyn returned home, determined to take matters into her own hands. That afternoon, she decided to visit the other farms in the area to ask about the animals' behaviors. The more she spoke to the other horse owners, the more patterns began to emerge. Every farm she visited had at least one horse standing in the water, staring at the surface with an eerie stillness. As she spoke with Rita, a farmer who lived down the road, she learned that the behavior wasn't limited to just horses. "My cows are acting strange too," Rita said, her brow furrowed in concern. "They keep walking toward the creek, even though there's no reason for them to be there. They're standing by the edge, just watching it. It's the very oddest thing." By the time Evelyn returned to her farm, the weight of what she had learned was heavy on her mind. It wasn't just Blue. There was a larger pattern happening across the whole area, and it involved water. But the question was, why? Why were all these animals suddenly drawn to the water, standing motionless as if waiting for something? Evelyn couldn't shake the sense that there was an answer buried somewhere in the land itself. That evening, she sat by the fire, her mind racing with possibilities. There was something deeper at work here. Evelyn had no answers yet, but she was beginning to see a bigger picture, one that was going to take every ounce of her determination to solve. The cold of the early morning was biting, but Evelyn had no intention of letting it keep her from what she needed to do. The discovery she had made about the other animals, the horses, the cows, and even the birds, had left her with more questions than answers. If something in the water was causing this strange behavior, she needed to understand it better. And the only way to do that, she decided, was to take the plunge herself. Evelyn stood at the edge of the pond, the frozen surface glistening in the pale light of dawn. Blue was there, as always, standing perfectly still in the shallow end, her hooves submerged in the icy water. Evelyn could see the mare's breath clouding in the frigid air, her dark eyes seemingly staring into nothingness. For a moment, Evelyn wondered what was going through Blue's mind. Was the mare just as confused as she was? Or was there something about the water that was drawing her? Something Evelyn couldn't see or understand. She shivered, though it wasn't from the cold. The decision she had made the night before still felt overwhelming. But there was no turning back now. If the horses were finding some comfort in the water, if it was somehow soothing them, maybe there was something Evelyn could learn by experiencing it herself. And maybe, just maybe, she would find an answer to the mystery that had been keeping her up at night. Taking a deep breath, Evelyn slipped off her boots and rolled up her pants, careful to avoid the icy waters with her feet. As she stepped closer, her skin tingled at the thought of the freezing cold water. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she certainly wasn't expecting warmth. But there was something in her gut that told her to try it, to step into the pond and feel the water for herself. As the wind howled around her, she pushed all the doubts from her mind. The first step was shocking. Her feet plunged into the icy water, and she immediately gasped. The cold was like a slap to her senses, an overwhelming shock. But she didn't pull back. She had come this far, and if there was even a small chance that she would learn something about Blue's behavior, she had to keep going. Evelyn's breath came in sharp gasps as she waded farther into the pond. Her legs ached from the cold, but she kept moving. Just a little further. And then something strange happened. The cold, which had been nearly unbearable at first, began to soften. It was subtle at first, a tingle, almost like a light massage on her skin. She paused, lifting her foot slowly and then placing it down again, trying to understand what was happening. The water was still freezing, but the sensation was different. There was warmth, not the kind that made the water feel comfortable, but something deeper, almost like an electric current, traveling through the water and into her limbs. She hesitated, trying to push past the odd sensation. But as she looked down into the water, she saw movement. Tiny movements. Hundreds of tiny fish were swimming around her feet, nibbling gently at her skin. Evelyn froze, her heart racing. She had seen these fish before, in documentaries about spas and wellness treatments. They were known as gara rufa, doctor fish, the kind used in spas to nibble on dead skin and exfoliate the body. But what were they doing here, in the pond? Her mind whirled with the implications. These fish weren't native to the area, not in the wild at least. They had to have been introduced somehow, and if they were in the water, perhaps that was what was affecting the animals. Could they be the cause of the strange behavior? As Evelyn stood still, the fish continued to nibble at her skin, their tiny mouths tugging lightly at the dead skin cells. It felt strange, but not unpleasant. In fact, it was oddly soothing, as though the fish were performing some sort of delicate, calming massage. She wondered if that was the appeal for Blue, the sensation of the fish nibbling at her hooves, soothing away whatever discomfort she was feeling. Could the horses be experiencing the same calming effect? Evelyn stood there for several more minutes, letting the fish continue their work. The water no longer felt painfully cold, though the temperature had not changed. It was as though the fish had somehow altered the experience, made it bearable. She felt the tension in her shoulders ease, the weight of the mystery lifting ever so slightly. If this was what Blue had been feeling, it made sense why she would return to the pond day after day. But the questions didn't stop there. Where had these fish come from, and why were they so attracted to the horses and the other animals? What was it about this pond that made it the perfect environment for them? Evelyn had more questions than ever before, but at least now she had a starting point. The fish were a clue, one that could lead her closer to understanding what was really happening. The horses weren't just standing in the water out of some inexplicable urge. There was something in the pond that was drawing them, and something that was likely soothing them, giving them comfort in the middle of winter's harshest days. With a new sense of determination, Evelyn carefully made her way out of the pond, her legs shaking from the cold, but her mind buzzing with possibilities. She needed to do more research. She needed to find out everything she could about these fish, about their behavior, about how they interacted with other animals, and most importantly, she needed to share her findings with the others. The animals weren't just acting strangely. They were responding to something in the water that had been there all along. Now, it was up to Evelyn to figure out how to harness that knowledge and how to protect the ecosystem that had brought these strange creatures into her life. The day after Evelyn's strange encounter in the pond, the air was heavy with anticipation. Her mind raced with thoughts of what she had discovered. The gararufa, those tiny fish that had nibbled gently at her feet, now seemed to hold the key to the mystery that had haunted her for so long. She couldn't shake the image of Blue, standing motionless in the pond, the cold water swirling around her hooves while these tiny fish swam around her, soothing her in ways Evelyn still didn't fully understand. The discovery was unsettling in some ways. The idea that something so small could have such a profound effect on the horses, the cows, and even the birds in the area was hard to grasp. But Evelyn was determined to figure it out. She had spent too many years studying ecosystems, observing how different creatures interacted with one another, to let this puzzle slip through her fingers. Her first step was to conduct some research. She pulled out her old biology textbooks, the ones she hadn't touched since she retired from teaching, and started flipping through the pages. The gararufa fish were well known in the world of spa treatments, used for their ability to exfoliate the skin by feeding on dead skin cells. but she hadn't found any information about them being present in the wild, let alone in the cold ponds of the authentic countryside. Evelyn spent hours poring over information, online articles, research papers, and old notes from her teaching days. The more she read, the more the pieces started to fall into place. Gararufa were originally found in the warm springs of the Middle East, particularly in Turkey and Syria. But they had been introduced to various parts of the world, both intentionally and accidentally, through aquariums, spas, and the exotic pet trade. The more Evelyn thought about it, the more she realized that the presence of these fish in the pond had to be accidental. Someone must have introduced them to the ecosystem without realizing the impact they would have. The fish seemed to thrive in the pond, finding a perfect balance in the cold water. Their small, nibbling mouths weren't just cleaning the horses. They were likely feeding on the dead skin cells, removing any irritation or discomfort the animals may have been feeling. It wasn't just a calming sensation, it was healing. And if that was the case, it made sense why the horses, the cows, and even the birds were so drawn to the water. Evelyn felt a wave of excitement wash over her. She had discovered the first part of the puzzle. But the bigger question remained. What was the fish's role in the ecosystem? And why had they chosen this particular pond to call home? Determined to find more answers, Evelyn decided to visit the pond once again, this time with a more scientific approach. She arrived armed with a notebook, a camera, and her trusty field guide. Blue was already in the pond, standing in her usual spot, the water swirling gently around her hooves as the Gararufa swam around her. Evelyn knelt down at the edge of the pond, careful not to disturb the delicate balance of the water. She took note of the fish's movements, the way they moved in rhythmic patterns around Blue's legs. It was clear that the fish weren't just feeding on the horse's skin. There was a level of comfort in the way Blue stood, almost meditative in her stillness. Evelyn could see it in the way the mare's muscles relaxed, the tension in her body easing as the fish continued to nibble at her hooves. It was as if the fish were working in harmony with the horses, a symbiotic relationship that Evelyn had never seen before. As she observed the scene, Evelyn's mind began to wander. The fish had found a place to thrive in the pond, but what about the other animals? Were they all part of the same ecosystem? What did the fish provide for them? And more importantly, what was the long-term impact on the land and the animals that depended on it? Evelyn took out her camera, snapping photos of Blue in the pond, the fish swarming around her hooves. She knew she needed evidence, something to share with the community, to prove that this wasn't just a random occurrence. The horses weren't sick. They weren't suffering. They were receiving a form of healing, a natural therapy that had been happening right under their noses, unnoticed until now. As the morning wore on, Evelyn watched as more horses arrived at the pond. It wasn't just Blue now. There were others. Horses from nearby farms, all drawn to the water. Some stood motionless, just like Blue, while others waded into the pond, allowing the fish to swim around their legs. It was a peaceful scene, one that Evelyn knew had to be shared with the rest of the community. If these fish were truly responsible for the calm that had descended over the animals, then they needed to know. By the time the sun had risen higher in the sky, Evelyn had a clear plan. She would host a community meeting, bringing together the farmers, the vets, and anyone who was interested in understanding the mysterious behavior of the animals. She knew it would be met with skepticism at first, but she was confident in what she had discovered. There was something bigger happening here, something that could change the way they all looked at their animals and the land they cared for. That afternoon, Evelyn gathered the town's horse owners, vets, and interested farmers in the community hall. The room was filled with chatter as people milled about, curious about what she had to say. She stood in front of them, her heart pounding with anticipation. She had spent weeks wrestling with this mystery, and now she was about to reveal the truth. "Thank you all for coming," Evelyn began, her voice steady. "I know you've all seen the same strange behavior in your animals that I have seen in mine. Horses standing in the water, cows grazing near the streams. birds flocking around the ponds, it's not a coincidence. There's something happening in our ecosystem, and it's not just random behavior. She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. The animals are being drawn to the water because of the Gararufa fish. They're not just standing there. They're being healed. These fish are feeding on the dead skin, offering a form of therapy for the animals. They're calming them, helping them in ways we didn't understand. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Evelyn knew this wasn't going to be easy to accept, but she also knew she had to share the truth. As she spoke, she felt the weight of the mystery lifting from her shoulders. The discovery had changed everything. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Evelyn knew she had to present her findings carefully, but she also understood that the truth was something the community needed to hear. The discovery of the Gararufa fish and their soothing effect on the animals had the potential to change everything, not just for the horses, but for the entire way the community approached their land, their animals, and their relationship with the natural world. Evelyn had spent hours in the community hall, preparing for the meeting. She arranged chairs in a large circle, setting up a projector to show pictures of Blue standing in the pond, surrounded by the Gararufa fish. She'd gathered research articles and notes from her own observations, and she planned to show the others how the fish had likely been introduced into the local ecosystem, most likely by someone cleaning out an old spa tank. Though the fish weren't native, their presence had created a unique and harmonious balance in the pond, one that seemed to soothe the horses, cows, and even the birds. The evening of the meeting arrived, and the community hall was filled with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. People from nearby farms, horse owners, and a few local vets had come to hear what Evelyn had to say. She could sense the unease in the air. They were all used to thinking of nature in terms of control, how to keep it in check, how to manage it for their benefit. The idea that something as small as a fish could be healing their animals was difficult to accept. As Evelyn stood in front of the group, her nerves were barely contained. She cleared her throat, glancing at the faces in the crowd. Some were familiar, others were strangers. All of them were here for one reason: to understand the strange behavior of their animals. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Evelyn began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. I know you've all seen the same things I've seen: the horses standing in the ponds, the cows by the streams, the birds drinking more than usual. You've all been wondering what it means, why the animals are acting so strangely. Well, I'm here tonight to tell you that it's not random. It's not some kind of illness. It's not a mystery anymore. The room fell silent, on the weight of her words hanging in the air. Evelyn paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. For the past few weeks, I've been watching the animals, observing their behavior, and I've discovered something that I believe will change how we think about our land. It's the Gararufa fish, the so-called doctor fish, that's been causing the animals to gather around the water. These fish are feeding on the dead skin of the animals, offering them a kind of therapy that's calming them, healing them in ways we didn't understand. She clicked the remote, and the screen behind her flashed to life, showing a picture of Blue standing in the pond, the tiny fish swarming around her legs. The crowd murmured as they saw the images. Evelyn could see the curiosity begin to replace the skepticism in their eyes. "These fish weren't here originally," she explained. "They were likely introduced by someone cleaning out an old spa tank, but somehow they've adapted to the pond. They've created a symbiotic relationship with the animals. The fish feed on the dead skin cells while the animals receive relief, a kind of natural therapy. This is why the horses and other animals are so drawn to the water. They're not just standing there randomly. They're seeking out a natural form of healing." There was a pause, and then the questions began. "How do we know this is safe for the animals?" one of the local farmers, Tom, asked, his voice skeptical. "What if there's something dangerous in the water? How can we be sure this won't harm our livestock?" Evelyn nodded, prepared for such a question. She had done her research and was ready to address these concerns. "I've looked into it," she said calmly. "I have spoken with experts, and while the fish themselves aren't native, they're not harmful. Gara rufo fish are used in spas around the world precisely because they don't carry diseases or harmful bacteria. They have a natural, gentle way of feeding, and they're perfectly safe for animals and humans alike. As long as we ensure the pond remains clean, the ecosystem will remain balanced." The room seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. Some of the tension that had filled the air loosened. "But why haven't we noticed this before?" Rita, another horse owner, spoke up. "How could something like this go unnoticed for so long?" Evelyn smiled softly, understanding the confusion. "The fish are small. They've blended into the pond's ecosystem without us noticing. It wasn't until I observed the horses in blue that I began to realize what was going on. Animals have instincts we don't always understand. They were drawn to the water for a reason, and now we're starting to see why." A few more questions followed, but Evelyn answered each one with the calm assurance that came from her years of teaching. By the time the meeting was coming to an end, the atmosphere in the room had changed completely. What had started as a room full of doubts and skepticism had transformed into one of curiosity and hope. Now that we understand what's happening, we need to think about how to incorporate this knowledge into our care for the animals, Evelyn concluded. "I'm not suggesting we abandon all our traditional methods of animal care, but perhaps we can begin to use a more holistic approach. This pond, these fish, they're part of the ecosystem here. If we nurture it, if we work with nature instead of against it, we might find that the land can heal itself, and our animals along with it." The group sat in thoughtful silence for a moment before Tom, the farmer who had raised concerns earlier, spoke up again. "You know, I never thought I'd say this, but you might be onto something, Evelyn. Maybe there's more to the land than we've given it credit for." Several others nodded in agreement, and the room buzzed with quiet excitement. As the meeting broke up and the people started to leave, Evelyn felt a sense of satisfaction wash over her. She had done more than share her findings. She had opened a door to new possibilities. The community now had a chance to think differently, to view the land not just as something to control, but as something to work with, to understand and nurture. It wasn't just about healing animals anymore. It was about healing the connection between humans and nature. Evelyn stood by the door, watching the last of the attendees leave. Her heart was light, her mind already racing with the next steps. The journey was just beginning. The days that followed the meeting were a whirlwind of change. The town seemed to be alive with a newfound energy, a buzz of conversation and curiosity that had never been there before. What had started as a small discovery, something that Evelyn had quietly puzzled over, was now a catalyst for a complete shift in how the community viewed their relationship with the land and animals. People who had once been skeptical were now eager to learn more. Farmers, ranchers, and even children who had listened intently during the community meeting began to see the natural world around them in a new light. They were no longer just stewards of the land, working it for their own benefit. Now, they were part of a larger, interconnected ecosystem, one that needed to be respected, nurtured, and understood. Evelyn felt a quiet pride swell inside her as she watched the changes unfold. It wasn't just about the horses and the fish anymore. It was about a fundamental shift in perspective, one that was already taking root in the town. And it was happening more quickly than she had imagined. It started with the farmers. Tom, the one who had been most skeptical at the meeting, came by her farm a few days later, a thoughtful expression on his face. He had a small herd of cattle, and he had begun to notice something strange. For weeks, his cows had been hanging around the creek, dipping their hooves into the cool water and standing still for hours. The behavior had puzzled him, but now that he knew what it was, he couldn't help but be intrigued. "I've been thinking about what you said," Tom began, standing at the fence that separated their farms. "I've been watching my cows, and they're not just standing around aimlessly. They're like they're waiting for something. And I wonder if they're getting the same kind of relief from the water that the horses are. Evelyn nodded. That's exactly what I think is happening. The fish are offering some kind of therapy, a kind of natural exfoliation that calms them, makes them feel better. You're not the only one. It seems to be happening all over the area. Tom scratched his chin thoughtfully, his eyes narrowing as he thought it over. I never thought much about how the animals interacted with the land before, but I'm starting to see it now. Maybe there's something to this whole ecosystem thing. Evelyn smiled. It was the first time she had seen him so open to the idea. She could sense the hesitation in him, but there was also genuine curiosity, a willingness to explore new ways of caring for his animals. A few days later, Rita, another farmer who had attended the meeting, called Evelyn with news of her own. Her horses, which had always been somewhat skittish and difficult to manage, had started behaving differently. They were no longer restless or anxious. They were calmer, spending more time near the pond, standing still in the water, as though the fish were providing them with something they had needed all along. I think we might have something here, Evelyn, Rita said, her voice tinged with excitement. I've been watching them, and they seem more at peace. I don't know how else to explain it, but they're not acting like they used to. I'm going to try moving them closer to the pond more often, see what happens. Evelyn was thrilled. She had known that the animals were benefiting from the fish, but hearing it from others in the community confirmed that her discovery wasn't an isolated phenomenon. It was real, and it was beginning to have an impact. The next step was to ensure that everyone understood the importance of maintaining the ecosystem in a way that wouldn't disrupt the delicate balance. Evelyn knew that as more people became aware of the benefits the fish provided, they would need to be careful not to introduce any harmful chemicals or pollutants into the water. She arranged a series of talks with local veterinarians, biologists, and environmental experts to educate the community on how to protect their water sources while still allowing the fish to thrive. The meetings were well attended, and people were eager to learn. They began to talk about the health of the ponds, the importance of monitoring the fish population, and how to manage the surrounding land to ensure the ecosystem remained sustainable. Evelyn found herself in the role of a guide, showing the town how to shift from a mindset of control to one of coexistence. In the evenings, families started gathering by the ponds with their children, showing them the small fish swimming near the water's edge. Evelyn often saw parents explaining to their kids how the fish helped the horses and other animals, fostering a deep respect for nature in the younger generation. What had once been a quiet, isolated farm was now a place of learning and discovery. Evelyn herself had never imagined that the simple act of observing the land would lead to such profound changes. She spent more time by the ponds, watching the animals interact with the water, feeling a deep connection to the land that she hadn't felt before. She would sit quietly at the water's edge, blue grazing nearby, and watch the horses slowly wade into the water, standing still with the fish nibbling at their legs. One morning, as winter's chill began to wane and spring began to show its first signs, Evelyn sat by the pond, watching as the community's horses, cows, and even some of the birds gathered around the water. The fish were still there, thriving in the cold pond, offering their therapy to all who came. The animals seemed at peace, their once anxious behavior a distant memory. The community had not just learned to work with nature, they had begun to see it as a partner. They understood that the land wasn't something to be controlled, but something to be nurtured, respected, and protected. And in return, nature had provided them with the gift of healing. As Evelyn sat there, the sun rising over the trees, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. What had started as a quiet, solitary moment of observation had become something much larger. It had sparked a change, a shift in the way the community viewed its relationship with the land and the animals. And she knew, with certainty, that this was only the beginning. The changes Evelyn had hoped for began to unfold with a quiet yet profound momentum. What started as a singular discovery about the Gara rufa fish and the animal's curious behavior had transformed into something much more significant, in a movement toward a more holistic, symbiotic relationship with nature. The town was evolving, not just in its understanding of the land, but in its approach to the future. Evelyn found herself in a new role, one that she had never expected. She'd gone from a biology teacher, a woman focused on facts and lessons in the classroom, to a leader in the community. Someone people turned to for guidance on how to live more harmoniously with the environment. She had never been the type to seek out the spotlight, but as the days passed, it became clear that the community was eager for this shift, eager for change. The town's farmers were the first to adopt the new mindset. They had been the most resistant at first, hesitant to believe in anything that seemed unconventional, but as they saw the positive changes in their animals, calmer horses, happier cows, birds returning to the streams, they began to experiment. They shifted their practices, using fewer chemicals, allowing more natural vegetation to thrive around their fields, and using sustainable farming methods that supported the ecosystem rather than harming it. Evelyn had worked with the local agricultural association to organize a series of workshops on sustainable farming practices. These workshops brought in experts on organic farming, water conservation, and ecosystem management. And slowly, the community began to see that by working with nature rather than against it, they could foster healthier crops, stronger animals, and more resilient land. One evening, as Evelyn stood by the pond, she saw Tom, the farmer who had once been the most skeptical, walking toward her. His face was weathered from years of hard work, but his eyes were filled with a new sense of purpose. "Evelyn," he said, tipping his hat as he reached her, "I wanted to thank you for all the work you've done. I've started changing things on my farm, giving the land more room to breathe, more time to recover, and I can already see the difference. My cattle are more relaxed, and I've even noticed some of the crops coming in stronger this season." Evelyn smiled, touched by the words. "I'm glad to hear that, Tom. It's all about balance. The land needs time to rest, to renew itself." "I never thought I'd hear myself say it, but you're right," he chuckled, shaking his head. "I used to think the harder you worked the land, the better it would do. But now I can see that's not the case. There's a natural rhythm to everything. We just need to learn how to listen." Over the next few weeks, other farmers began to follow Tom's lead. They implemented more sustainable practices, allowed their pastures to regenerate naturally, and worked to protect the ponds and streams that had once been taken for granted. The result wasn't just healthier animals. It was a thriving ecosystem that supported more than just the livestock. Native plants began to return, and the streams and ponds were cleaner, teeming with fish, insects, and small animals that hadn't been seen in years. Evelyn's work wasn't just with the farmers. The community began to embrace a broader view of their relationship with the land. Families took to visiting the ponds and streams, walking along the banks, and observing the changes. Children who had once played on the farms without much thought to the land's health now asked questions about the fish, the trees, and the animals. The connection they once took for granted was now a subject of fascination. Evelyn organized pond talks, nature sessions where families could come together to learn about symbiotic relationships between animals, plants, and the environment. These informal sessions were held by the pond and the streams, where they could observe firsthand the delicate balance at work. The town's children, in particular, were eager to get involved, asking questions, drawing pictures of the fish and animals, and learning how their actions impacted the environment. For many, these talks became an essential part of their education, something they could carry with them as they grew older. One afternoon, as Evelyn sat by the pond, blue grazing peacefully nearby, she saw a group of children approach, their faces bright with curiosity. They were carrying notebooks and pencils, ready to learn. "Miss Evelyn," one of the children, a young girl named Clara, said eagerly, "can we come and see the fish today? We've been reading about them in school, and we want to know how they help the horses." Evelyn smiled, a sense of pride swelling in her chest. "Of course. Clara, come on down to the water, and we'll see what's going on today." The children knelt by the edge of the pond, their eyes wide as they watched the fish dart around the horse's legs, nibbling at the skin. They asked questions about the fish's role, the pond's ecosystem, and how they could help protect it. Evelyn patiently answered each question, explaining how the balance of the ecosystem had shifted and how the animals had learned to adapt to it. As the day wore on, Evelyn felt a quiet joy in her heart. The children weren't just learning about science, they were learning about empathy, about the importance of stewardship, and about the deep connection between humans and nature. This was the kind of education that went beyond textbooks and classrooms. It was the kind that lived in the real world, in the soil beneath their feet, and the animals that shared the land with them. That evening, as Evelyn walked back to her farmhouse, she felt a sense of fulfillment that she hadn't experienced in years. The community had not only embraced the changes, they had made them their own. They were no longer just caretakers of the land. They were partners with it, working together to nurture a thriving ecosystem. As she watched the sun dip below the horizon, casting a golden light over the pond and the land, Evelyn realized that this was the work she had been meant to do all along. She had come to the countryside looking for peace and quiet. But what she had found instead was a deeper, more meaningful connection to the land, to the animals, and to the people around her. The quiet wisdom of the wild had taught her many things, but most of all, it had shown her that healing, trust, and connection often begin where we least expect, and that sometimes the answers we seek are right in front of us, waiting to be discovered. Winter had come and gone, and the transformation of the town was nothing short of remarkable. The harsh, biting cold that had once seemed like an obstacle to both humans and animals had now receded into the background, making way for the soft embrace of spring. The animals were no longer restless. They had adapted to the balance of the land and water, and the entire ecosystem had shifted in a way that felt natural, almost destined. The Gara rufa fish, once a mysterious and unexpected element, had proven to be the key that unlocked a new understanding of the land's rhythms. As spring unfurled its green tendrils across the hills, the land seemed to breathe with renewed life. Flowers bloomed along the streams, and the trees began to sprout new leaves, casting cool shadows on the earth. The ponds, once feared and ignored by the farmers, had become centers of peace and connection, their waters now bustling with life. The horses, once drawn to the pond out of confusion, now returned daily, calmly wading into the water with the same ease as the birds that perched along the banks. Evelyn stood at the edge of the pond one late afternoon, watching the gentle ripples on the surface as blue grazed nearby. The once persistent tension that had clung to the air seemed to have lifted, replaced with a quiet sense of harmony. The horses were no longer hesitant or restless. They had learned to trust the land and the water. It was as if the ecosystem itself had healed, and in turn, the animals had healed too. The pond was now a symbol of the town's transformation, where once it had been seen as just another part of the farm, another element to manage. It was now recognized for what it truly was, a living, breathing entity that needed to be nurtured and protected. The presence of the Gara rufa fish had become a metaphor for the change that had rippled through the entire community. The fish had brought balance, not just to the animals, but to the people who cared for them. Evelyn had been invited to speak at the town hall again, this time not to present findings or share discoveries, but to reflect on the journey the town had taken together. The room was full, the usual chatter now replaced with a quiet, respectful anticipation. She stood at the front, the weight of the community's progress settling on her shoulders like a cloak. It wasn't just the horses that had benefited from the new balance. It was everyone who had come together to embrace the changes. "Thank you all for coming," Evelyn began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. A year ago, when I first noticed Blue standing in the pond, I had no idea what we were about to discover. None of us did. But here we are today, having learned something profound something that has changed not only the way we care for our animals, but how we care for the land. She paused, letting her words settle over the crowd, her gaze sweeping over the faces of the people who had once been skeptical but had now become believers. Farmers who had spent years working the land with an iron fist now looked at their crops and animals with a new kind of reverence. We've seen the way the land can heal itself when we work with it, not against it, she continued. We've learned that sometimes the answers to our problems are already here, waiting for us to notice them. The Gara Rova fish didn't just help our horses. They helped us see that nature has a way of solving its own problems, if we let it. The room was still. People were listening intently, processing the weight of her words. There were no more doubts or questions. Instead, there was a deep sense of gratitude. Evelyn could see it in the way people looked at each other. A silent acknowledgement that something bigger had happened here. The meeting ended with a round of applause, a sound that filled the room with warmth and recognition. Evelyn felt a wave of relief wash over her. The community had truly embraced the change. They weren't just talking about sustainability. They were living it. The ponds had become places of learning and curiosity. The once dismissed water sources were now seen as vital to the health of the animals, the land, and the people. Evelyn made her way home, her steps light as she walked down the familiar path to her farmhouse. She had come to this land seeking peace, and now she had found something even more meaningful, a deeper connection to the earth, a new understanding of balance, and a community that was ready to take on the challenges of the future. As she reached her porch, she turned back for one last look at the pond. Blue was standing in the water, her legs submerged, her head held high. There was something profoundly peaceful in the sight of the mare, a living symbol of the transformation that had taken place. The fish darted around her, gently nibbling at her hooves, and Evelyn felt a quiet smile tug at the corners of her mouth. The horses, the fish, the land, everything had come together in perfect harmony. The change was not just about the animals. It was about the way the community had learned to live with the land, to listen to it, and to respect its natural rhythms. It had taken time, patience, and a willingness to let go of old ways, but now they understood that healing, trust, and balance could be found not by controlling nature, but by working alongside it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm, golden light across the landscape, Evelyn sat on her porch and watched the world around her. The pond rippled in the evening breeze. The fish swimming just below the surface, and the animals grazed peacefully in the fields. The balance had been restored, and in that stillness, Evelyn finally understood that the answers she had sought, the peace she had been looking for, had always been right here in the quiet wisdom of the wildwood. Part 10, Final Reflection as spring ripened into summer. The world around Evelyn seemed to hum with life. The changes that had swept through the town, subtle at first, like the first stirrings of a gentle wind, had now settled into something lasting, something ingrained in the fabric of everyday life. The land had healed, the animals had healed, and so had the people. What Evelyn had once considered a small discovery, a chance observation, had turned into a way of life. The pond, where Blue had stood for so many cold days, was no longer a place of mystery or uncertainty. It had become a symbol of change, a place of quiet reflection where people from all walks of life now gathered. Evelyn found herself there most mornings, watching the horses wade into the water with calm, steady movements, the Gara Rufa fish darting around their legs, working silently to ease the tension that still clung to their bodies. It was a peaceful scene, one that Evelyn had never imagined when she first arrived on the farm, searching for solitude and healing. But what she had found instead was something far more profound. The land had a way of healing itself when given the space to breathe, when humans stopped trying to force their will upon it. And in turn, the people had healed as well. The town had found a new rhythm, one that was more attuned to the natural world, more willing to listen and learn. It had taken time, patience, and a willingness to change. But in the end, it had all come together in a way that Evelyn could never have anticipated. She had often thought about what her father would have said if he were here to see it. He had been a man of the land, someone who understood its rhythms and its seasons, but he had also been someone who believed in hard work, in striving, in pushing the land to give more than it could. Had he been alive, would he have resisted the changes Evelyn had helped bring about? Or would he have understood in his own way that sometimes the best thing to do was to let the land rest and heal? Evelyn didn't know, but she hoped that, wherever he was, he would see what she had accomplished. He had given her the land, the horses, and the farm, and now she had found a way to give it back to the land, a gift that would continue to give for generations to come. One warm afternoon, Evelyn stood by the pond, watching as blue grazed peacefully nearby. The water rippled gently, the fish swimming lazily through the cool depths. Evelyn had come to know this pond, this land, in a way that was far deeper than she would have imagined when she first inherited the farm. She had learned the language of the land, the unspoken dialogue that existed between the animals, the plants, and the water. And it wasn't always easy to understand, but with patience, with time, the answers had come. It was in these quiet moments by the water that Evelyn felt the deepest connection to the land, a connection that went beyond words, beyond thoughts. It was a connection that transcended the need to control, to manage, to understand every little detail. It was about trust in the land, in the animals, and in the natural rhythms that governed everything around her. Evelyn had come to realize that peace, real peace, came not from striving, but from allowing the land to do its work, allowing the animals to find their own balance, allowing the rhythms of the world to unfold without interference. As she watched Blue move gracefully across the field, her coat shimmering in the late afternoon light, Evelyn felt a deep sense of contentment. She had come to the farm looking for quiet, but what she had found instead was something far richer, a deeper understanding of the world, a renewed sense of purpose, and a connection to the land that she had never known was possible. Evelyn smiled softly to herself as she took a step back from the pond, feeling the warmth of the sun on her skin. She had done what she had set out to do. She had shared her discovery with the community, and they had embraced it in ways she had never anticipated. The horses were no longer nervous or anxious. They now stood with quiet confidence, their movements graceful and calm. The fish swam in the pond, doing their work silently, helping the animals find the relief they needed. The town had learned to live in harmony with the land, and in turn, the land had rewarded them with its bounty. But Evelyn knew that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The land was always changing, always shifting, and there would be more challenges ahead. But now, the community had the tools they needed to face those challenges. They had learned that the land wasn't something to control, but something to care for, to listen to. They had learned that when they worked with nature rather than against it, the rewards were far greater than they could have imagined. As she stood there, the sun dipping lower in the sky, Evelyn thought about the future. What would it look like? What would happen when the next generation took over the farm? When the children who we had learned so much from the pond talks became the stewards of the land? She didn't know. But she was confident that the lessons they had learned about trust, about balance, and about the importance of listening would stay with them. The wisdom of the wild, once overlooked, had now become part of the town's legacy. It was something that could never be taken away, something that would continue to grow and evolve long after Evelyn was gone. With one last look at the pond, Evelyn turned and walked back to her house. She didn't need to look back again. The land had taught her everything she needed to know. And now, it was time for the next chapter to begin.